get on with it. Global Tea Break today is on the history of menswear with the fabulous Russell Nash, and we're going to invite him here, and I'm hoping, so he's my tame, dapper chap. I hope he's wearing something fabulously dapper today for us. There he is!
Good afternoon, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
So nice to see you.
You look lovely in yours. I bet you haven't been wearing that much in the last few weeks, have you?
Alex, how dare you? I always dress like this.
I know.
I've dressed down for you today a little bit.
You're always well turned out. Do you know what? So I put on a dress for you today, but I also got my Hollywood sunglasses on as well, so I can just sort of, you know, sit here and waft a little bit.
How about these?
Fantastic. Now, Russell, I'm so thrilled that Russell could join me. Yeah, because we worked together a lot. We trained together, and we had a
trained together. What an amazing experience we had.
And we did. We had a lot of laughs and
and some tears.
And some tears, yeah, some tears as well. But we work together quite a lot, quite regularly. And one thing that you are particularly known for are your menswear walks, your fashion walks, because it's something that you love an awful lot. You obviously, you know, you dress kind of slightly vintage a lot of the time, and you always look amazing. And whenever I run across you in the street when I'm with my guests, they're like, who's that? And I just always say, nobody of importance, don't worry. But of course, you are incredibly important to us. And so I kind of wanted to know a little bit about, you know, you do these amazing menswear walks all the time. I've done a few of them, they're fantastic. If we wanted to start out with menswear, where do we start? Who do we go to? Who do we look to about where it all started?
Okay, well, I mean, obviously we don't have time to do the entire history of menswear. So let's just talk about a few of these men who might be kind of important in the story. And the fact is, if you're going to talk about modern menswear, we're not going to go back to togas and doublet and hoses and stuff. We're going about modern menswear. We're going to go back a couple of 100 years and really talk about a chap called George Brummell. Everybody calls him Beau Brummell. He's known as Beau Brummell.
Ooh.
There he is. Well,
hang on, that's not the right picture. I have a better one.
That's a bit of him.
Oh, that's one.
And that's the other bit of him.
Worked. Why have these pictures not worked? We can sort of see his like.
Well, we can see his lovely tails.
Ridiculous.
So. We're going to try a different one. So modern menswear really started with George Brummell. So we're talking about a chap that lived in the late early 1800s. Oh,
I've taken it off because you can't really see it. What I'm going to do.
Okay,
Carry on.
No, that's fine.
Carry on.
And he lived in the late early 1800s, and he launched himself onto London society round about sort of 1800, and
there we go.
Very quickly became. Oh, there he is. There he is. So I guess if you look at him, the key thing to notice is that it's quite a sober style of dressing. Up till this point, men were wearing much more ornate clothing, lots of brocade, lots of velvet, lots of bright colours. But it was considered to be a sort of Italianate, Frenchified way of dressing. Don't forget, around about this time, 1800, we've got the Napoleonic Wars going on. We're not long after the French Revolution. So this new style of dressing that Brummell brought in, this sort of pared down, stripped back, simplified form of dressing, was seen as a way of kind of marking these chaps out as different to these slightly more frivolous European. I'm making it sound a bit Brexity. But,
I was just thinking that.
Anyway, but it's kind of ordered, it's classical. Lord Elgin had brought the marble statues from the Parthenon over around this time. So people are looking at the simplified sculptures of ancient Greece. So it's perfect for the age. Now, Brummell didn't have any breeding in, you know, he was not an aristocrat. His father was a public servant. In fact, he'd been born in what's called a grace and favour apartment in Hampton Court Palace.
And we spoke actually this thing because just yesterday I was speaking about another resident of a grace and favour apartment in Hampton Court Palace. Julie Singh. They wouldn't have been there at the same time, but that's quite an interesting little link there because that grace
absolutely. And people lived in Hampton Court Palace in these apartments up until the fire in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, Brummell launches himself on London, and immediately became known as this kind of exemplar of men's style and dressing, and everybody kind of was in love with the way he dressed. especially and even the Prince of Wales.
Yes.
Prinny, George IV, who if I did that little thing on Guide London the other week, if anybody's interested, I can look that up on.
Yeah, it's
on
still up there.
George
Yeah, if
IV.
you're interested, it was fantastic chat on George IV, our most frivolous and well, spendthrifty
The
monarch.
really preposterous prince, we call it.
Yes, exactly. And your talk was brilliant. So if anyone wants to see that, it's over on Guide London on Facebook, and it's uploaded there. It's brilliant, really good.
So Bromwell and Prince are really good friends, but they have this massive falling out. A lot of people think that Prinny, the Prince, was actually quite jealous of Brumwell's style and wit and dress sense. And things really went downhill after that for Bromwell. And the story doesn't have a particularly happy ending. He ended up fleeing to France. He contracted syphilis, which ate into his brain, and he ended up dying in an asylum, in a mental asylum.
And there's a good story about him being quite rude to the king, isn't there, as well?
That's right. There was a party, and Lord Alvanley was having a party, and the Prince of Wales was a huge, obese fella. And Bromwell called over to the room. He shouted out, "Alvanley, who's your fat friend?"
Oh,
across the room, yeah, which didn't go down very well.
Didn't go down very well.
It must be said. And that was really the thing that meant that all of the support that he had disappeared, and his creditors started coming on top, and it all went downhill from there. And that was the end of Bromwell.
It's slightly, it's slightly sad end to what.
Yeah, slightly. But his name lives on. Even people who don't know very much about clothing have heard of George Bromwell. And
they've also heard the term dandy as well, which is applied to him.
Absolutely. But what I think is always really quite interesting is that when we use the word dandy now, it normally refers to somebody who's a bit overdressed.
Yes.
Whereas it was exactly the opposite at the time. The dandiacal fellas, of which Bromwell was the kind of head, were dressing less frivolously than people had dressed. So it's a very weird thing that
I think dandiacal is my new favourite word. Dandiacal is brilliant.
Dandiacal, the body dandiacal.
Our lovely colleague Mitchell has asked, did he make clothes?
Oh, no. He was a gentleman. So he wouldn't have done. He would have been very liberal with his patronage. He didn't want anybody to be known as the person that made George Bromwell's clothes. And as was the tradition at the time, there would be one man who would make day trousers, another man who would make night trousers. There was this huge industry across what's Mayfair and St James's, and actually into and Soho as well. Because don't forget, Regent Street hadn't been built at that time, so there was no great divide between the posh bits of Mayfair and the rather more run-down bits of Soho. It all kind of merged into one. But it was around there that he would have all of his clothes made.
And he didn't make clothes, but he did sort of make fashions and trends, didn't he? Or make
absolutely.
Make
people followed him.
He didn't make new garments, made new garments, didn't he? In terms of
absolutely.
And so, following on from Beau Brummel, and he's linked with the royal family. The royals are people who have always, throughout history, had their finger on the fashion pulse, aren't they?
Absolutely, and particularly, there's one fella, particularly, I guess, who was born in 1899. 1894, and his name was Albert Edward Christian George Patrick Andrew David Windsor.
He could have a few more names, if I'm honest.
That's it. Yeah. Albert Edward Christian George Patrick Andrew David Windsor. He became Prince of Wales, and then he became, there he is, then he became King Edward VIII, and after the abdication was known as the Duke of Windsor. When people often describe him as the best dressed Englishman of the 20th century, and I've got a little nod to him today with the blue tie and the blue jacket and the little,
I was wondering actually.
Yeah. He was an incredibly well dressed man. Look, we can leave his character, his politics, his behaviour to one side and look at him purely as a style icon.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing about David, everybody called him David. All of his friends, his family called him David. So we'll call him David. The thing about David is this expression, dress soft. So up until this point, if you think about the way that Edwardian men were dressing, with really heavily padded clothes, lots of stuffing in them, stand up very, very straight, and you could barely move in these suits. They were so structured. This much more relaxed style of dressing that David really pushed. And he had great style. I mean, some people just had the capacity for dressing nicely and clothes sitting him. I mean, he was not tall. He was only, of average height. But he was very slim, 36-inch chest, 39-inch waist, 39-inch inside leg. But clothes fitted him very, very well. He had a kind of casual stylishness.
And there's quite a few royals who have sort of been clothes horses at times. David and also Princess Margaret and people like that who have just
Prince Charles. He goes to the same tailor that the Duke of Windsor went to, predominantly Anderson and Shepherd, and Harry. Although he's not royal anymore, of course. Long story. We won't go into that. He dresses very nicely. He favours the double-breasted suits like his father, whereas William tends to wear more the single-breasted suits.
Yeah.
But when David died,
no, go on, carry on.
When David died in the 1980s, he left behind 55 day suits, 15 evening suits, and over 100 pairs of shoes. Oh
my goodness! Do you know where they all are now? Like, what happened to them?
Well, they were sold off. In fact, if you want to know about the great British style menswear in the late 20th century, the catalogue that Christie's in New York published of all of his clothes that were sold off is almost a Bible of great British clothing. And if you're interested in women's fashion, her stuff, Wallace's stuff, which was also sold off, and her jewellery, the catalogue for that is a fantastic record of two incredibly stylish people.
Very much so. Okay, so if this is what the royals are wearing in this period of time, what are the normal people wearing? How is their fashion changing at this period?
Okay, well now the next picture, I bet almost nobody would recognise this man. Can we get him up?
I've lost the track of which one we're... Oh, this one here.
The bloke with the glasses. There he is.
Go.
And he looks kind of just like every other English bloke that you would expect to see in the 1940s.
Yes.
And that's ties in with the way that he dressed people. So his name was Burton, Morris Burton, a Jewish tailor from originally what's now Lithuania, arrived at the beginning of the 20th century. And his shops, his tailor shops, and he had over 350 of them, which is more branches than Marks and Spencer's have today, which gives you a context. But yeah,
all
absolutely.
Over the country, I assume?
Sorry, say that again?
All over the country, I assume?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the key thing about Burton's is that not only does everybody look like everybody else, because everybody is buying their clothes from it, but men wanted that. Men didn't want to really stand out at that time. But he was a brilliant businessman because they didn't have any stock in the Burton's stores. You would go in, you would choose your suit, you would choose the fabric, you would choose the colour, and that would be sent to a factory in Leeds, Hudson Road in Leeds, where at one point over 4,000 people were working. And within a very short amount of time, within a week or two, the suit would be delivered to the shop.
Yeah, that's amazing.
As he owned the cotton mills, he owned the button factories, he owned everything, he owned the freehold of the shops. It was an amazingly vertically integrated company.
Goodness. That's a kind of monopoly going on there, isn't it?
Well, except, I mean, there were lots of competitors. There was the 50 Shilling Tailors, there was Lewis Hepworth's, Associated British Menswear. They were all kind of doing the same kind of thing, but most of those are gone. Now, interestingly, Hepworth's in 1980 hired a man called George Davis to remodel the business, and he basically turned Hepworth's, which for 40 years had been providing clothes for British men, into Next, which is still on High Street today, still producing. Still owned by the same family, so it's a very successful reinvention of the business. But the other chap that I just wanted to mention, alongside.
But very quickly before we leave him, I've had a question from someone who has a brilliant handle. I don't know who this is. Gibbering Loon asked, "Did Burton not do the demo suit? Oh, sorry, demob suit."
Demob, yes, he did. So most British men, when they left the forces after the Second World War, would have their suits supplied by Burton's. So he got the contract to do that. And a Burton, what they call CC41 suit, is a kind of, you know, they made thousands and thousands and thousands. I'm just checking on my notes here. They made a quarter, Burton's also made a quarter of all the uniforms for UK soldiers in World War II. Over 13 million garments.
That's incredible.
So huge connection to the war effort. But yeah, you often see on eBay the Burton D-Mob suits come up very often.
Wow, that's impressive. So sorry, who was the other person you wanted to mention?
A chap very quickly called Cecil G. A bit later, 1950s, 1960s, because he had, there's a picture of a Cecil G shop. He was in Soho. And Soho of the 1950s, the gangs, people like Billy Hill and the Turkish gangs, but a lot of music going on, the birth of British rock and roll, and Cecil G was really associated with that. Some people might have heard of Cecil G. It was quite a staple on the high street until the late 1990s. It's gone now, but the name might be familiar to some people.
Oh, wow.
But Cecil G was bringing in the 1950s, when we get what we might call the Macmillan boom. I think in America they call it the Eisenhower boom. This huge economic boom of the late 1950s, the arrival of the teenagers, kids not wanting to dress like their dads anymore.
Yeah, of course.
And you know, men would come across London. So my dad, who grew up in the suburbs of London in the 1950s, would go down to Charing Cross Road, between the Gielgud Theatre and the Sondheim Theatre, that in the middle there, that was where Cecil G had his shop. And buy things like these Italian bum freezer jackets with the skinny lapels and the small collars, mohair, skinny ties, all this sort of stuff. But also the American Ivy League look.
Yeah.
Cuban Hills, you know, think kind of Tommy Steele and Adam Faith and all these sorts of British rock and rollers. Cecil G really rode the wave of all of that.
We've got someone saying they remember Cecil G, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, they were very. When I was a teenager, I used to shop in Cecil G. As I say, they've all gone now. I think it's owned by JD Sports. They own the name, and it's like an online
completely weird.
Brand, they don't have the store shops anymore.
Gary says, Gary, my lovely tame cab driver and regular heckler,
yes.
says he's got a very old wooden Burton hanger. So there you go.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah, you mentioned a little bit about the kind of the rise of the teenager and like not wanting what their dads are wearing and something else. What are the cool kids wearing?
Well, first of all, now show the picture of one of the most famous album covers of all time.
Now, this is an album cover that most people probably won't know. It's very obscure.
Yeah.
People have never really seen it. It's by a band called the Beatles, something like that.
There we are. Yeah. So, first of all, in 1963, when the Beatles arrived on the screen, it changed everything in terms of popular culture. But this, let's look at the clothes that the guys are wearing. So all three, now, forget George Harrison, who of course was the coolest Beatle, but is wearing double denim.
Absolutely, coolest Beatle ever.
All the cool kids know that George was the best Beatle, but that's by the by. So he's wearing double denim at the back, but all the other three, George, Paul and Ringo, they're wearing suits made by a chap by the name of Tommy Nutter. Fantastic name. And I think we've got a picture of him.
We have, and do you know what, this is my favourite picture of the whole day. I think
great, isn't it? There he is.
I mean, this is you in another life, Russ. It really is.
So Tommy Nutter he wasn't really a tailor. He was more what we might call a designer nowadays. He worked with a chap called Edward Sexton, who was a Savile Row cutter who actually cut the garments. But he kind of took, it's known as the Peacock Revolution. 1963 to 1973, when there was this explosion in really fancy men's clothing. It might be the only time that menswear was a rival for women's wear in terms of fashion on the cover of fashion magazines and stuff like that. But Tommy Nutter, what he was doing was creating clothes of Savile Row quality. So Savile Row is the worldwide centre for great men's tailoring.
Even now, it's known for tailoring.
Absolutely. And it was then. But the problem was just like my dad didn't want to dress like his dad, so the son of an aristocrat didn't want to dress like his dad, and so they were stopping to, the people that could afford to go to Savile Row were stopping going there in the late 60s. And Tommy Nutter really put the row back on the map. He was very much associated with the Beatles. His partner, his life partner, was the boss. His name is Peter Brown. Was the boss of the Beatles' Apple Corporation. Yeah. The Beatles played their very last gig on the roof of Number 3 Savile Row.
Yeah.
On the 30th of January 1969. There it is. 2 weeks later, Tommy Nutter opened his shop on Savile Row.
Amazing. And
people like Mick Jagger and John Elton and John and Yoko and David Bowie and all these sorts of people are going to Tommy Nutter's. He wasn't a great businessman, went bankrupt several times. He was a very much liked as a mentor. So through the 1980s, this new wave of tailors arrived. People like Timothy Everest and Richard James and Oswald Boateng, some people might know those names of more modern British tailors. Tommy Nutter was a great mentor to them. The last thing that he really did was, if you think back to those Tim Burton Batman movies, the very first one.
Yeah.
The Joker. If you remember that purple suit that he wore.
Yeah, vividly.
I think it's one of those things that everybody kind of knows. Yeah. That was made by Tommy Nutter. It was one of the very last things that he did. Sadly, he was a victim of the AIDS epidemic, and he died rather young in 1992.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. But he really put the Savile Row back on the map. I think that's the key.
We've had a quick question. Who dressed the Beatles? So Tommy Nutter dressed them in certain, but I mean, so many people dressed them, didn't they? There's a whole variety. Timbaland.
Yeah, they did. I'm not. Maybe one of our colleagues who does the rock and roll tours a bit more might know a bit more about that.
But I think people queued up to dress them, and they went through.
They certainly did. They certainly
stuff.
Did.
So I think a variety of different tailors
yeah.
is the answer.
They didn't have a stylist like a pop star might have today. That's for sure.
No. So yeah, Savile Row. So of course, like I say, we still go along Savile Row today. We still talk about it, and it's it's still very much a part. In fact, do you want this picture now? This amazing one here.
Yeah. So that is a chap called John Stephen, and he is really the man who created what we know as fast fashion, and he's the man behind the explosion of Carnaby Street. Yeah, so Carnaby Street is the other thing you always think of in terms of fashion, especially in the 60s. It's Savile Row for tailors, Carnaby Street for kind of the swinging 60s, the funky sort of 70s. Absolutely. And they stick in there, they stick in there from Camden Town to Leicester Square. Everywhere the Carnabetian army marches on, they are each one a dedicated follower of fashion. There you go, one of my favourite songs. That's the Kinks. So yeah, there's a great picture of it, isn't there? Yeah. So John Stephen, the thing about his clothes is they weren't great quality. Kind of Primark nowadays, that sort of thing. The people who were buying clothes from John Stephen, because if you think Cecil G, it was still suits essentially, and it was still middle-aged men behind a counter serving to teenagers. Whereas John Stephen had 18, 19-year-olds working in the shop, music blaring out, rails of clothes on the street, big glass windows, and new stock every week. Yeah. When you think of somewhere like, as I say, Zara or Primark or somewhere like that, part of their business model is that there's always something new, always something you can afford. And that was something that John Stephen really created. He ended up with about 13 or 14 shops on Carnaby Street itself. That's enormous. And I know, it's amazing. He's an interesting character as well. He bought his first Rolls Royce at the age of 24. The papers called him the £1 million mod. Wow. How he was dubbed. Would that photo be on Carnaby Street, do you think? I'm not sure if it is. I feel like it looks a bit smart for Carnaby Street to me. Yeah. He lived in one of those grand squares at the top of Oxford Street, Portman Square, or one of those. So it might be around there, more likely. And Carnaby Street really played into this new thing of teenagers, because the teenager is not something that has always been a thing. You'd kind of get to your
well, a variety, varying ages throughout history at the point at which you'd start to go to work, and that would be it. It'd be child, adult. So this new teenager thing comes in kind of the 60s, and it's people with money and this love of fashion, this love to want to go out. So he played right into that and helped kind of develop the teenagers. Sorry about that, but you know,
yeah.
Anyway, got teenagers.
You know, with full employment, which there was in the 50s and the 60s, or everybody coming of age at 16, 17 was leaving school, going to work. There wasn't the universities. You know, only less than 1% of school pupils would leave school and go to university. Most would go to work. By the age of 17, they were earning a decent wage. They want to dress differently to their parents.
Yeah. And
John Stephen really captured that and really created, you know, this swinging 60s thing.
Amazing, isn't it? Mitchell has a question. Is Jermyn Street still big for shirts? Absolutely.
Probably, I would say some of the best shirt makers in the world are on Jermyn Street. The Turnbull and Asser, probably the best known of them all, where you can buy a shirt off the peg. It's about, I think it's £185 for a shirt off the peg from or you can have a bespoke shirt made. You can have a shirt made for you. They'll take, you know, 15 different measurements, and they will go to the factory in the Midlands, and they will make the shirt for you. There's a minimum order of 4 shirts.
Of course.
And they work out about £2.50 each, upwards depending on the fabric.
Yeah. And they're quite interesting because they've dressed every James Bond in history as well, haven't they?
Every single actor from James Bond has gone there. Sean Connery, there's a great photo. We don't have it, but people can find it online. There's a great photo of Sean Connery being measured up. But if you go into Turnbull and Asser today, or you know, online, the shirt that they made with the cocktail cuffs for Sean Connery is still part of the range today.
It is, and as is the spotty bow tie that Winston Churchill by there as well. So they know their history, and they keep it in there, which is lovely. And actually going in there, the service in there is phenomenal. And they'll take you,
and they're really nice in there. I take clients in there all the time. I found all the shops around Jermyn Street, St James's are really, really nice. I'm sure lots of other guys will back me up that they're really great about, you know, people coming in and talking to them.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Marnie, your sister is saying Kingsman on Savile Row. I'm also Gibbering Loon is asking again, what are cocktail cuffs?
It's a rounded cuff rather than so it would be, instead of being cut square like this cuff, it's rounded. Right,
that's a cocktail cuff. There you go. I didn't know that. Great question. So, is there anything else that you want to cover before we finish up on the?
No, I mean, if there's any other questions, we can take them. Otherwise, maybe we should let people get back to their afternoons.
I think so. Yeah. Look, I think we've answered all the questions that have been that popped up. So, Russell, thank you so much for coming today and having a chat. It's been having you here. Yeah.
Always nice to talk to you, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Russell does actual whole walks around this area on the history of menswear, and they're fantastic. So as and when we're back up and running again, please look him up. Because it's great. Thank you also to everybody who donated to the fund to help my friend Anil in India. We smashed our target, so thank you so much. He can't believe it, so it's amazing. So thank you very much. What we've got tomorrow, we have blood and guts and gory stuff. So it's going to be a great one for the kids tomorrow. Then the weekend off, and then next week I'll sort of put up another menu on Sunday about what we're doing. But we do have Henry VIII coming and chatting to me live next week on Friday. So don't miss that. We've also got a really exciting guest on Thursday who I'm just trying to finalise. But we've got some good stuff coming up next week. So thank you so much, Russell. See you again soon, and see everyone tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Bye.
Bye.